Hey guys and gals, is it okay if I do a little power pop video before my highly anticipated shoegaze video? Cool, thanks. Hey everyone, welcome back. Hopefully your week has gone well. Today I want to do a video where I discuss power pop. I want to explain kind of what it is, the bands that define the genre, and kind of go over my top 10 favorite albums in power pop. So, what is power pop? Power pop is full of hooks. It's typically upbeat. It's power chord driven rock and roll. Has a good rhythm. There's tons of offshoots of power pop like college rock, jangle pop, glam rock, etc. For this particular video, I'm just going to be focusing on power pop, or trying to stay within that focus as much as I can. So when I read that the phrase power pop was coined by my favorite artist, Pete Townshend, I was very pleased. So here's a quote directly from Pete Townshend that I found. He said, "Power pop is what we play, what the Small Faces used to play, and the kind of pop the Beach Boys played in the days of fun, 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 which I preferred." So I thought that was kind of cool. And I think early Who singles like Pictures of Lily, Substitute, and I Can't Explain are kind of building blocks of power pop. So when I think of power pop, I go back to these three 60s bands primarily, the three Bs I like to call them, and that's the Byrds, the Beach Boys, and the Beatles. You know, with the Byrds, you get that jangly guitar sound, the chiming guitars. Also, they had some unique harmonies that they added to the mix. The Beatles with their hooks, their melodies, their harmonies, Lennon and McCartney as just this powerhouse duo. And obviously the Beach Boys with their amazing harmonies. So the three Bs to me, I mean, they really helped influence power pop. Other bands from the 60s that I would say were very influential to power pop would be Nazz, the Easybeats, The Creation, the Kinks, The Move, and The Who. Some heavy hitters there that contributed to the foundation of power pop. I want to talk about some well-known power pop bands. I'm sure most of you have heard of several of these groups. Even though these didn't make my top 10 favorite power pop albums, they're still very important to me. I listen to these on a regular basis, and they're worth checking out if you haven't heard of any of these bands or artists. So, first I want to talk about the Raspberries. This is a band from Cleveland, Ohio. They're very Beatles-esque, so if you lean more towards the Beatles and their sound, you're probably gonna really get into the Raspberries. This is the first compilation I started with. It's a fabulous introduction. In fact, this is one of the best sounding vinyl records I own. It's pressed well, it's recorded well. Songs like Go All the Way, Tonight, I Want to Be With You, Let's Pretend. That's a great starting point. I've also got two of their studio albums. So this is their first one, and then Fresh Raspberries. Great group. Moving on to the Knack. These aren't really in any particular order. It's just I want to show you guys some of my favorite power pop bands. So this is the Knack's first album, Get the Knack. The Knack got their start in 1978. They're from LA. They definitely modeled their image after the Beatles. They were known for playing some really energetic shows. I'm sure they were awesome live. So songs you'll recognize from this would be My Sharona, which was a huge hit that's still played on radio today, and Good Girls Don't. So that is an excellent power pop album. Pretty much exemplifies the genre. All right, the next band, the Romantics. I really love the Romantics. They're really fun and upbeat. You can dance to their music. This is their debut. So, you guys are gonna know the songs What I Like About You, and then off their, I think this is their third album, Talking in Your Sleep. Those are two big hits for them. Next we have the Cars. How can you talk about power pop without mentioning the Cars, right? So I've got this Cars Greatest Hits. Rick Ocasek, I mean, he was a legendary artist. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple years ago, but here's the track listing on that. You'll recognize several songs. I also have Shake It Up. Their debut is a perfect album. Candy-O is also a really good album. The next band I want to talk about is a group called 2020. They're from Hollywood. They had a hit called Yellow Pills, which ended up on a lot of compilation albums related to power pop. So if you get their first album here or their second one, look out. Those are both very worthy albums to own in your collection. Next, I'm going to talk about a band called The Shoes, and they were from Zion, Illinois. What's interesting about The Shoes, and I've got two albums to show. This one's present tense. I would say they had some Beach Boys harmonies going on. What's interesting about The Shoes is that I think it was two brothers and then a friend of theirs in high school that decided they wanted to form a band. However, they didn't know how to play any instruments. So after they graduated, they took a year to kind of learn their respective instruments, and then they regrouped and then recorded their first album. I think Black Vinyl Shoes is their first album. I do not have that one. That one's kind of hard to find on vinyl. I haven't seen it yet, but I also have Tongue Twister, which is more new wave power pop. Really good. Next, I'm talking about a band called The Beat, and they were from LA. They recorded albums under The Beat and Paul Collins Beat. The early Beat consisted of Paul Collins, Peter Case, who was later in the Plimsouls, which I'm going to mention here in a little bit, and Jack Lee. This is their most well-known album. It's just self-titled, The Beat. Fantastic songs on here. I love this album. Very catchy. So next I want to talk about the Plimsouls, because I was just talking about Peter Case. He was in The Beat. He was also in a power pop group called The Nerves, which I have yet to check out and sample myself, but that is on my list. They only recorded 2 albums. This is our second one, Everywhere at Once. I really enjoy this album. It's just straightforward power pop. Next I want to mention Todd Rundgren. I do not have any of his albums. I have a hard time getting into some of his solo material. However, his album Something Anything is probably his most accessible power pop record. I Saw the Light is on there, which was a pretty big hit, and I just love that song. So if I ever find that album for a cheap price, I'm going to pick it up, but I haven't really stumbled upon it too often. Todd Rundgren got his start in the garage psych group called Nazz. I love Nazz. I have 2 of their albums. He is a trailblazer in prog rock, computers, electronic music. He has produced some superb albums like Badfinger Straight Up, XTC Skylarking, and the New York Dolls' first album, so he's a talented guy. Next, I want to mention Elvis Costello. Elvis Costello is one of my favorite artists. I only started getting into him heavily last year, I would say. I still need to get his first album, My Aim Is True, but it's nearly a perfect album. I do have it on cassette somewhere in one of my boxes, but that's one I've been looking for on vinyl. His early albums were a nice blend of power pop and punk, I would say. I really love this album, This Year's Model. Some new wave touches on his early albums as well. So catchy, the songs on here. And then his early 80s stuff I also really enjoy. Imperial Bedroom, that's one of my favorite albums from him for sure. So Elvis Costello, definitely important to the power pop movement. All right, I'm going to show you some CDs of some bands that I really enjoy. So Sloan are a band that I've been following probably since the early 2000s, and I started with this compilation from Sloan called A-Sides Win. This is a Canadian power pop band, really solid tunes. That was a good introduction for me. I also wanted to show this album from them, From One Chord to Another. This was huge for them. I think this was released in 96. Yes, 96. This band is kind of unique in that each member takes turns with songwriting and lead vocals. Another favorite from them is Never Hear the End of It from 2007. This is excellent. Another modern power pop band I like is Fountains of Wayne. They released 5 albums. They're from New York City. I don't think they have any plans to record any more albums. In fact, I think their last album was from 2011. But the 2 I really like from them are their self-titled and then Utopia Parkway. Just excellent power pop. They use a lot of storytelling in their songs, which makes it kind of fun. Some of They definitely use some humor in their music. All right, next I want to mention one of my favorite power pop groups. This is Velvet Crush. This is probably their most highly regarded album. It's Teenage Symphonies to God. It was released in 1994. So they were from Providence, Rhode Island. The two core members of the group are Rick Mank and Paul Chastain. Rick Mank is one of my favorite drummers ever. He records a lot with Matthew Sweet as well, which I'm going to mention later on in this video because Matthew Sweet is one of my favorites. This is some of the most beautiful power pop I've ever heard. So if you haven't heard that one or Free Expression, I just recently found this on a road trip. This is one of my favorites as well. And then their first album is In the Presence of Greatness. So check out Velvet Crush if you are unfamiliar. I'm going to quickly mention a band called the Flashing Lights. They were a Canadian power pop group, very influenced by The Who and the Kinks. So they're now defunct, but I really enjoy this album. This is called Where the Change Is from the Flashing Lights. I know I just mentioned Blue Ash in my last road trip video, but I have to mention it again. These guys were extraordinary. They were from Ohio. I think they only had maybe 2 or 3 albums. This is their very first one, No More, No Less, from 1973. Excellent songwriting on here. They have a couple of covers. They have Dusty Old Fairgrounds by Bob Dylan. And then they do a cover of Anytime at All from the Beatles. I think they were dropped by Mercury in 1974 just because they had low sales for their albums, which is a shame. There's a CD retrospective of them called Around Again, I believe. It's 44 songs of unreleased material. I'm going to try to get my hands on that. But they are a group worth discovering if you've never heard their material before. Okay, the Bongos. The Bongos are one of my favorites from the 80s. Richard Barone is the leader of the group. He's a great artist. I think there's an autobiography he put out within the last few years. The Bongos are kind of odd. They're power pop and new wave. Their lyrics are a little bit unclear at times, but their music makes up for it. They're just a fun band. This is also a band that has a cult following. So I also have an EP of theirs as well as their second album, Beat Hotel. Good stuff. Next, I want to mention the Posies. The Posies were a band from Seattle, Washington. I think Bellingham to be exact. But the 2 albums I have that are just perfect examples of 90s power pop would be Dear 23, which came out in 1990. Yes. And then Frosting on the Beater, which I got recently. These reissues, these remasters from Omnivore Recordings, they're 2 LP sets. They're remastered at 45 RPM. Oh my gosh, you guys need these in your collection. They sound so perfect. I love listening to these. So the Posies have been compared to the Hollies with their harmonies and then Big Star with their songwriting. I will mention 2 members from the Posies later on in this video. Anyway, we're going to move on to the Smithereens. The Smithereens were a band from New Jersey. Here's their first album, Especially For You. This is one of my favorite albums from them. My introduction to the Smithereens was this compilation called Blown to Smithereens. The first song I ever heard, and I think I mentioned this in another video, the first song I ever heard from the Smithereens was when I watched Romy and Michelle's high school reunion. Blood and Roses was played in that movie, and I was like, who is that band? I had to pick up their stuff after that. Green Thoughts, the second album. So Pat Denizio's voice just kind of sucks me in. I love his voice. The Smithereens definitely took a cue from the 60s groups like The Who, and then they kind of added some jangle to their music, which I really like. I think Don Dixon, did he produce this one? Yeah, he produced their first album. Perfect recording here. Just, you're not going to skip any tracks on here. So I almost forgot to mention XTC. And 2 albums are more poppy, power poppy in my opinion. Skylarking, which Todd Rundgren produced. And then Oranges and Lemons. These are not my favorites from XTC. My favorite album from XTC would have to be Black Sea. I prefer their early punky sound. I also love Drums and Wires. So, but these albums definitely exemplify power pop. So, Andy Partridge, genius. All right, I want to mention Jellyfish next. So this is their first album, Belly Button. Their second album, Spilt Milk, is actually my favorite, but I can't find my CD right now to show you guys. Describing them, I would say if Queen and Supertramp collaborated with some more power pop in there, you would get Jellyfish. I really like Jason Faulkner in the band. I think I've heard some of his solo material as well. That's really good. I think they broke up because they just didn't sell the records. They didn't make it big like they wanted to. So there is a documentary on YouTube, I believe, and if I can find that, I think Chris at Dixieland Farm mentioned that to me. I've yet to watch it, but that is on my watch list, so I will try to put a link down below if I find that link to that documentary. Jellyfish. The Replacements, to me, definitely went into power pop territory, especially with this album, Pleased to Meet Me. Oh, I love this album. I still need to get this on vinyl, but I love Alex Chilton off of here. Skyway, Can't Hardly Wait. Yeah, excellent album. Next, I'm going to mention a band called Nada Surf. Nada Surf got their start, I think, in the mid to late 90s, but I've got several of their CDs. This album, to me, The Weight is a Gift. There are so many power pop driven songs on here, especially like the first 6 songs. I can listen to those first 6 songs over and over and over again. In my last video, I played a clip of Always Love when I was going through one of the stores on my last road trip, but another favorite of mine is Lucky. So alternative power pop, they've got melodies, they've got that hook formula down. Matthew Cause is an excellent artist. I also like his side project he did with my favorite female artist, Juliana Hatfield. It was called The Minor Alps. That's worth checking out. All right, let me grab my favorite top 10 power pop albums. I'll be right back. It was kind of hard to come up with my definitive top 10 favorite power pop albums, but I did it and I'm excited to share these with you right now. So the first one is by a Scottish alternative power pop band called Teenage Fanclub. This is my favorite album from them. It's called Grand Prix. It was released in 1995. Even though this came out in the 90s, it makes use of those 60s influences in the best way. I just love the flow of this album. There's chiming guitars, gorgeous vocal harmonies. Yeah, it's just top-notch power pop from the 90s, so that's really enjoyable. This album right here is probably their most well-known album. It's called Bandwagon-esque, and it's also a very good example of 90s power pop. Number 9 for me is Matthew Sweet's In Reverse. Now, I could have chosen any of Matthew Sweet's 90s albums because they are just that good. Matthew Sweet is an artist from Lincoln, Nebraska. This is his 7th studio album. I like how someone described this album. They said it was a seductive ocean of sound. It's power pop, it's alternative, it's chamber pop. This is an ambitious album. The songs flow into one another just in a wonderful, beautiful way. And I would say this album combines elements of Phil Spector, Brian Wilson, Electric Light Orchestra, and the Beatles. The last track, Thunderstorm, it's like over 9 minutes. It also has like kind of a Neil Young feel to it. So I don't know. This is a masterpiece album, in my opinion, from Matthew Sweet. I never skip a track. I want them to reissue this on vinyl so bad. I could have also shown Girlfriend, 100% Fun, Altered Beast. He has so many good albums, you guys. So that is my number 9. Number 8 would be the Flamin Groovies. I chose Shake Some Action. This is their 4th album. It was released in 1976 on Sire. For this album, they took a different direction. There's kind of a reconstituted lineup. Their earlier material was more hard rock, and for this one, they took a more guitar pop direction, which I really love. So this one has a tighter, polished sound. It just works really well. They definitely channel the Beatles and the Byrds. You guys know the song Shake Some Action, the title track. That is perfect power pop song right there. I also love Sometimes, You Tore Me Down, Misery. This album, I love this album. This is a Canadian original press as well. All right, so my number 7 is Cheap Trick. I chose their 3rd album. Heaven Tonight. This was released in 1978. They're from Rockford, Illinois. There's a reason this band has sold 20 million albums. They've got the attitude, they've got hooks. This is just a perfect blend of hard rock and power pop. The big hit from this was Surrender, which I'm sure most of you have heard. Just really a really enjoyable album. You can't go wrong with their first 3 albums. I still need to find their first one on vinyl, but those first 3 are really excellent. I want to talk about a band called The Records next. So this is their first album. This is the US version. The British version is titled Shades in Bed. This came out in 1979. They're known as the British Big Star. I just love the gatefold on this. Look at that. Really nice. This is a masterpiece album in power pop to me. The song Up All Night, that's worth it for that song alone, in my opinion. Also, Starry Eyes was a huge hit for them. Tina Rama is another good one. I also love their second album. This one's called Crashes. My number 5 favorite power pop album would have to be Badfinger's Straight Up. Look at that. This is amazing with the hype sticker and everything. My friend Bo gave this to me. So this is their second album, I believe, and this was a very tragic story in rock and roll. They just didn't get the recognition and praise they deserved. I think early on they were criticized for sounding too much like the Beatles. Later on, 2 band members committed suicide. There is a documentary out on them, which I have not had the opportunity to see yet. But I'm looking forward to learning more about them and their whole story. But so many good songs off of this album. Baby Blue, Day After Day, Sometimes. Oh yeah, I Die Babe, that's another good one. So Todd Rundgren produced this album, and it's one of the best recorded albums out there, in my opinion. What's interesting is that Badfinger and Todd Rundgren really clashed in the studio, but I think that Todd really brought out the best in the band. So Straight Up by Badfinger. I've got a couple more Badfinger albums, but No Dice is another one I wanted to talk about and show, just because I think it really sets the bar high for power pop. There's some ballads on this. It's got a good mix of everything. So I really like Badfinger. All right, top 4. Nick Lowe with his first album. Well, in England, it was called The Jesus of Cool. This is the US version called Pure Pop for Now People. But Nick Lowe is extremely important to power pop. What's interesting is that he produced a lot of punk albums, like From the Damned and the Pretenders, etc. But he just didn't play punk himself. But he was amazing in the studio. And just awesome songwriting. There's some humor on this album. It's produced well. I love the sound of Breaking Glass, Heart of the City, Marie Provost, Music for Money. So this is like a 5 out of 5 album right here. I like his cynicism and his snarkiness and his lyrics. Nick Lowe is a genius. This album from him, which I played recently, Labor of Lust, is also a winner. This is the one that has Cruel to Be Kind on it. Thanks to my friend Bo, who generously gave those albums to me. Number 3, one of my favorite groups of all time, which, I don't know, there could be some contention on whether they belong in power pop because they kind of blur the lines. They could fit into power pop, they could fit into jangle pop, they could fit into new wave. This is their first album called Stands for Decibels. I've talked about this album a lot on my channel. This is a band from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I just love this because it's very experimental. You'll be listening to it and then you'll hear like an odd noise and be like, where did that come from? But it fits in with the music really well. I really like the 2 main songwriters and leaders of the group, Chris Stamey and Peter Holsapple. Their second album, Repercussion, is also really good. Over there, I have a CD that I started on with them. It was like my introduction to them. It Stands for Decibels and Repercussion. It's like a 2-in-1 CD. I really recommend that if you want to get into them. So yeah, Peter Holsapple and Chris Stamey also recorded this awesome album this collaboration album called Mavericks, and this came out in 1991. This is one of my favorite albums of all time as well. This was also very influential to 80s jangle pop subsequent to its release, especially on the southern jangle pop groups. So this is worth hearing, just saying. That's my number 3. Number 2, this is a heavy hitter. This is Marshall Crenshaw's first album. It's just self-titled. It was released in 1982. Is that Buddy Holly number 2? Is that Elvis Costello? That's kind of what he looks like, huh? I really like Marshall Crenshaw. He was born in Detroit, Michigan. His approach to pop music is very simple, and that's probably what makes his music so charming. It's no frills. It's just heavy hook power pop. My favorite song on here is Cynical Girl. I just love the lyrics on there. She Can't Dance is fun. Brand New Lover, I'll Do Anything. You're not going to skip over any tracks on this album. I bet you guys know what my number 1 is. My number 1 is Big Star's #1 record in Radio City. This is a 1978 reissue of their first 2 albums that I was lucky enough to find out in Washington. Excellent. So what got me started on them was my first boyfriend was really into Big Star, and he kept playing these 2 albums over and over again in the early 2000s, and I latched on to their music pretty quickly, and I've been a fan ever since. There was a lot of tensions within the band, especially after the recording their first album, #1 record. I think there was a lot of fights that broke out in the band, and then there were problems with Stax just not promoting that first album very well at all. All 4 band members had important contributions, especially to the first album, but the main focus was on Alex Chilton, who got his start in the Box Tops, and of course Chris Bell. So Chris Bell and Alex Chilton were the main songwriters of the group. Unfortunately, Chris Bell ended up leaving the group. I love his solo album, I Am the Cosmos. That's also a worthy power pop album. So there's some rockers on this. There's some ballads. The songs are reflective, melodic, very influenced by the Beatles and the Byrds with the jangly guitars. So many catchy songs on this. It's like the holy grail of power pop, in my opinion. The second lineup of Big Star occurred like from 1993 to 2010, and 2 members from the Posies joined Big Star. I think it was, who was left? Was it the bassist and the drummer, Jody Stevens? Jody Stevens, by the way, he's one of my favorite drummers ever. I think he's really underrated. So I just had to mention Big Star's #1 record and Radio City for my #1 favorite power pop, I guess, albums. So I had to combine these 2 albums to make my #1. I know that's kind of cheating a little bit, but I think they belong together. In fact, the first CD I ever had from them had the first 2 albums on it. So Big Star, you need Big Star in your life. All right, you guys, that is my top 10 favorite power pop albums list, plus a little history of power pop and some of the important bands that define the genre. Let me know what your favorite power pop bands are. Maybe provide your top 10 album list. I'd be curious to know. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll be doing a room tour here soon. I imagine maybe within the next week. Thank you guys. Please like and subscribe. See you next time. Cheers.